Welcome to the December 2024 Foresight Games meetup, last one of the year, and very excited here to have Valens Games back to talk about AI and how they're using AI on their new platform and what they're learning along the way. So with that, I'll turn it over to their team. Excited to hear what you have to share.
Thanks so much, Randy. It's great to join you, and hello, Foresight Games community. As you'll recall, I'm David Gartenstein-Ross. I'm here with Eleanor Ross, who is the lead game designer at Valens Games. And we're today going to talk about large language models and how they are changing and revolutionizing the game design process. It's been great to be able to talk with a number of you previously. Some of you have already seen our Providence platform, but I think there's a lot going on behind that in terms of how large language models are fundamentally transforming the way we do gaming and what the potential of gaming is. So without further ado, let me dive in. You might recall from last time, we talked about the immersive exercise style of gameplay that Valens Games employs. We think it's relatively distinctive. Eleanor, would you like to talk about immersive exercises and what they are?
Yeah, absolutely, David. So as you can tell, and David is also can tell, we're super excited to tell you about exactly what we've been doing and what our immersive exercise style of gameplay is. We mentioned this previously in our past conversation with y'all, but it really goes on four things that we think are integral and, as Randy said before we kind of kicked off, especially are vital to the non-defense side of wargaming, but also really to what we believe should be in a lot of the defense side. So that includes immersive media. So that's news, social media, videos, and memos with personality. So David, maybe you can talk about one of those memos that we create that has so much more personality than, some of the, I would say, more typical war game memos.
The main thing that stands out for me is the different phrases that I at times have done word searches for when looking through our archives. I think the one that is seared in my memory is epic amounts of cocaine. It's a memo that went to a Russia team in which they are pursuing an alternative strategy for recruiting information operatives. And it features this rather shady journalist who is a very skilled networker. And they pursue a disgraced former MSNBC journalist for some time, and eventually are able to lure him over. And this memo describes in detail the way in which they were able to lure this journalist in. And it the journalist's name is Corey Morris, and it talks about like their operative, their key connector, going to strip clubs with him. Then they go back to the operative's apartment and snort epic amounts of cocaine, and finally stand out on his balcony singing the Russian national anthem. And for those of you who one thing I'll say there, because this has been sort of a point of contention with, minor contention with some others in the gaming community. Those of you who've done intelligence work, or those of you who've been in the government, actually understand that this stuff comes up all the time, right? Like if you've read, a lot of them are very dry. But if you've read, intelligence memos, there'll be areas where somebody wants to get something really interesting in. Often we'll use quotes around it. And so it mimics the way that we process things in life. That to us, to all of us as human beings, humor is a part of what we do. And that's reflected in our game environment. Eleanor, you kicked to me on an example of immersive media. I want to kick back to you on deep world building. What sets our world building apart?
Yeah, what sets our world building apart is the deeper you look in, the more we have explored and created. So David just talked about, his name is Marshall Witherspoon, this person who is part of what we term the Valens verse. So it's the universe, but with Valens, which I think is quirky and fun. And he is a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 8-dimensional person. Like the 6-sided die, kind of, if you look at our logo, he has so many sides to himself that depending on which place you pull on, you'll unravel a different world. So for instance, in the game, in this photo actually on the screen that David is showing is Acceleration, which is one of our games that David is speaking about right now. And we have Marshall Witherspoon playing one of the characters in it, who is, saying things that are 100% maybe not be true or are true, but in this game, he goes down a route that is different from other games. So in a recent game that we had him in, he was murdered, and he went into a coma, and that was just what happened for that specific instance. And that's the deep world building that comes alive. Because I really want to talk about that compelling stories aspect, is how humans are storytellers. So I really do believe that if you connect some idea to a physical story, people will remember it better. For instance, right now, another thing I'm trying to teach in one of the games I'm creating about how China does intelligence work. And they do it, a different way than Americans do, or, other individuals do. It's very coercive, especially, based, a lot of people have family in China, second generation immigrants. So it's very implied and coercive. And so the way that we create these characters who are, spies, to be blunt, is with a background that is deep and gives them enrichment. So I want to kick to David about, why you really believe that this is a narrative that makes things stick, and why narratives are what creates fun and makes you remember.
Because humans are storytelling creatures. That's the primary reason. We understand ourselves through stories. We understand our history through stories. If we didn't, then when you picked up a history book, it would just be events that happened with no particular connection to one another and no characters in them. But we understand the world through characters. We understand the world through stories, through narrative arcs. And that's what our games seek to typify. These are all things we talked about before. So what is new? What is different than our last talk? What Eleanor and I are going to talk about today, and what we've been working on, is using large language models in a different way for game design. When we came into Valens Games, a company that we stood up about 7 months ago, one of the key challenges we looked at is the inaccessibility of games across a lot of the different verticals that are important to us. There's 4 primary verticals that our company operates in. One of them is government, one of them is private companies, one of them is higher ed, and the 4th one is K through 12. And across all of these spheres, games are often considered to be inaccessible. For one thing, they take a lot of time to create. And for a second, people think that there is a barrier in terms of expertise. It can be hard to build a game. And we realized that with the revolution in large language models, there is an opportunity to change the way all of us relate to serious games. Eleanor, do you want to talk about why you think LLMs are the solution?
Absolutely do, because LLMs have made my life so much easier. The first thing I want to talk about is how they make simple games, so things that you can run for K to 12, easy to create. So I know, because I, like everyone here, went to school. And in learning in my K through 12 years, it's very, you do the same thing. And teachers try to change it up and shift, but it's very repetitive. Games are something that people remember. Children play video games because they're fun. People play, role-playing Dungeons and Dragons, things like that, and they remember those experiences. So imagine you go into class, and instead of reading an article on the Treaty of Versailles, you're actually acting it out and being different people negotiating on the Treaty of Versailles, or it's, the Battle of Gettysburg, and you're having to explain why people are moving different ways. That's what it can create for people, and people get really into it, like really into it. I know, David, can you give any example of people getting so into our games that they just continue going on?
There's many examples of that, but one thing I actually want to talk about is a concrete example, because you mentioned the Treaty of Versailles. You and I were talking about this just before this call. And it's on my mind because we're recording this on, is it December 12th today, I think?
11th.
11th? Yeah, same difference. So it's December 11th right now when we're recording this. One thing that is at the top of my mind, given my background in the counterterrorism field, is the fall of Assad in Syria and what comes after the fall of Assad. And Eleanor, you and I were talking about an immersive exercise that I used to run back when I was the lead instructor for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers individual terrorism awareness course, or INTAC. And it was an 8-hour block of instruction, and because 8-hour blocks of instruction are super boring, I decided to put a game in the middle, obviously. And the game at the time, this was 2016 to 2017, so this was back when ISIS still had its caliphate in Syria. And so I put together a game which looked at what would happen after ISIS's caliphate fell. And what stood out for me is I had a group of people who just gotten back from Syria. They had deployed as part of a civil affairs team in northern Syria. They had like crazy stories to tell. But all of them, after playing this game, and I'll let you talk about the concept of the game, and then I'll explain what the reaction was. The concept of the game was, at that time in 2016, if you go back and think of where we were, ISIS was so vile that all these natural enemies were all aligned against it. Like ISIS was fighting Assad, and it was fighting Iran, it was fighting Hezbollah, it was fighting the US, it was fighting other European allies of the United States. It was fighting the Kurds, it was fighting Turkey, right? It was literally fighting everybody. And what the game looked at is the fact that once ISIS was removed from the picture as a force that could unify all these disparate factions, they would go back to having multiple conflicts with one another again. And we can see that that's happened. And so what stood out to me was these guys had gotten back. They were in a civil affairs unit. They'd been in northern Syria. They played this game, and multiple members of that team came up to me and said, now I understand what was going on. And I was like, what the, you just got back from Syria. But something stood out for me then, right? Like, so for all of us, I think our process of seeing the value of games has been an iterative one. That was really revelatory to me, right? Like, Randy, just before we got on, you were talking about like having experts in a room and how you really want to do well for experts. And that's true, right? But what I realized is that, the folks coming back from northern Syria, that doesn't obviously make you an expert, but they had been there. They'd been there. They'd been working with different groups, like with the Kurds, and had this inside knowledge. And yet to them, until they played the game, they didn't actually understand all the conflict dyads that existed. That made me realize just how much putting something into a gamified environment and putting people in role with the actual conflicts and relationships that they would have in that role makes them see it very differently. It's a different thinking device. So that, to me, Eleanor, is what explains not just people getting into it, but how people come away, even having some expertise in an area, learning something different after they put themselves in role. So that's how they get into it. But Eleanor, how do LLMs change the dynamic of accessibility of games? You've talked a little bit about LLMs, now they're useful to you, but like, what's the next step in LLMs?
The next step in LLMs is making it so anyone can just build those games and have those experiences that David just mentioned. So, we're all game designers here, or game adjacent, and we, spent hours, or at least I'll speak for me, I spent, months designing, conceptualizing, creating characters, ideas, and then doing those minutia of, writing out it's 2028. I don't think that it would actually be 2028. It's 2030, and then going back and having to change it all to 2030. So there's a double-sided thing. First of all, it helps us as game designers create games 5 times as fast, which means we can make games more accessible, these high-quality things we built. And second of all, it makes it so that normal people out there can build games themselves and create things that are easily accessible to whoever they're trying to teach, train, or give new insights to. And that's why I want to talk about, and I want David also to talk about, why LLMs are our creative co-pilot. They don't replace us. I have been using LLMs since I started working here at Valens Games. What are we, David? We're 8 months old.
We are 7 months old.
We are 7 months old. And I've been using LLMs the entire time to design my games. And I think that it has made me, first of all, think more out of the box because I can put in the context and background of what the game world is and say, give me 15 more ideas ranging from normal to absolutely outrageous that make sense in this world. And then I can build out those ideas. And yeah, what they give me is not always going to be the best, but it requires thoughtful prompts and high quality inputs from me, the game designer, to get things that are actually helpful and I can grow and build upon. So David, I want you to really quickly talk about how, your philosophy to AI game design as, the person who taught me game design initially and the person I met it with.
My philosophy of AI game design is that the AI basically functions in all of the roles that, for me, research assistants had functioned in. So when I show our Providence platform, and I'm going to show we'll show the Providence platform a little bit later on, and let me explain the reason why. It concretizes what we're talking about in terms of LLMs. We're doing something a little bit different with LLMs. Some of you have already seen it, but I think that it's important to concretize the argument about how revolutionary LLMs are, because I think we've already seen some of that with generalized LLMs that we can apply to game design. But when you see an LLM, a platform that optimizes them and puts them into game format, it suddenly becomes transformative for all of us. But my idea about LLMs, like as I've shown them to game designers, the good designers always say they do not feel threatened by LLMs, and they shouldn't. Because an LLM on its own, it's not going to create a game as good as Eleanor creates. It simply won't. And moreover, right now, and I think for the foreseeable future, an LLM is not going to do a good job on most decisions of replacing a human as a referee. But what LLMs do very well is allow you to take that creative vision and look at multiple iterations of a creative vision quickly, and fill out those aspects that should be relatively automatic, right? So Eleanor talked about the different media artifacts we use in our games. Media artifacts like news articles and tweets and the like. And there's beautiful news articles and tweets that I remember having been created in the past. I talked about the epic amounts of cocaine memo that my team and I lovingly produced in the pre-LLM days. Now, most of what's in there can be done via LLM with good prompt engineering, but good prompt engineering also includes those majestic lines and very memorable flourishes, where like that's part of how you make sure that it gets into the materials. Like you put it into the prompt, and that will make sure that it hosts the phrase or the details that you think are particularly important. This is where humans and AI function together. I think LLMs actually have, having played with them a lot, I think that they have actually relatively deep creative touches. It's impressive, but all the more so when like LLMs meet your energy, and the more you're able to give to them, the more they end up giving back. And there's something kind of transformative one can do with this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we dive in. Eleanor, how about your philosophy of LLMs?
My philosophy of LLMs is really following up on what David said, is you get out what you put into it. And it makes being a game designer easier regarding the minutia and the speed and precision that you can adapt to a game. So we can focus on the bigger picture, the character development, the storylines, and the world building. And the LLMs handle that minutia, which I talked about earlier, which to me is just exhausting, having to go through 30 separate documents and change, back we were running acceleration like I spoke before, and the last time we had run it, President Trump had been president and now Biden. So I had to go through every single document, which is, tens of thousands of words, and change out Trump to Biden and then change out his administration to her administration. And that takes time. And that's not me being creative. That's not me adding that crazy level of detail to games that, David is talking about, that we're about to talk about. And so my philosophy of game design is you get out what you put into it. And so I'm putting in all this background information and world building, and I'm getting out good, but only because I know what to put in. And that's something David really taught me, is like how we have to put crazy levels of detail in the game. And so, David, I want you to talk really, quickly or very deeply maybe about why you think games are thinking labs and having those details make them come alive.
Yeah, so we've been talking to a lot of people about different use cases of games. That's something that's important to us. And I know, Randy, it's important to you and to the Foresight Games community because you're looking at all of those different use cases. And so we've been privileged to be able to apply this to a number of different use cases, but I would, roughly speaking, divide them into maybe 5 use cases, 5 major use cases. So use case number 1 is education. That I think is relatively intuitive to all of us. Use case number 2 is training, which is distinct from education. Education is for students, training is for professionals. Use case number 3 is decision support. That a game can support you in making decisions because you're able to game through different potentials and understand how things fit together, similar to what I was talking about in the Syria and CENTCOM scenario from the INTAC course that I led. A 4th area is technical, is basically technical foresight. So a good example of this that we've done has been cybersecurity exercises, looking at, for example, ransomware attacks and walking companies through step by step what the response would be. That is literally a game, but one where it's looking at how their systems function in the case of a simulated ransomware attack. Then a 5th use case, I would say, is sensitization, right? So this is something we've done for companies where we've run a game that's designed really to just sensitize the workforce in the company to certain risks that, for example, could come with a tech deployment. There's one thing to talk about risks, but having to play a game where the risks come to life makes it real in a different way. All of these are ways in which games can be thinking labs, and being able to think through the various things that could happen is useful for all of us because, life is not, life can seem like a road without any turn lanes because we only get to experience it once. But there's branches that may be important to us, and so understanding the realm of the possible is extraordinarily helpful. That's where I would say that games are thinking labs. But Eleanor, we've talked about LLMs, we've talked about games. What's new here, right? Like I think everyone here has played around with LLMs. What is different that they haven't been thinking about yet?
Give me a second to think on that, David. What do you think has to be about LLMs that is new that people haven't really realized yet? I want to know what your perspective is because I want to hear that.
Yeah, so I think that there it was kind of my intro to the project that we've been working on.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure. I'm like, I think so, yes.
Yeah, you said on that.
I was like, are you sure? Is that what we're going to do? So yeah, I would love to talk to y'all about Providence right now, which is a way that we think we're putting the ethics of game into an age of LLMs. So Providence, as we briefly mentioned earlier, is our game design platform designed to do all what we said just now. So right now it's more towards game designers. Eventually it'll be for more, general use cases for those 5 vectors that David mentioned. And actually people are already using it for those vectors. But it's really intuitive to game designers. We ask about tone. We ask when you want to put this in. We ask, do you have any background information? You can put, how many pages, David, is it now? We keep going up.
1,000.
You can put 1,000 pages of background information into our proprietary, back end and just put it into the system and then help build a game. And soon you'll be able to run games through Providence. So you can upload your own documents that you've created, which I think is just revolutionary because we are using Microsoft Teams right now. And I don't know if anyone has used Microsoft Teams or you send information through emails or you have handed out physically, but it's exhausting and tech focused and like very minutia based. And through Providence, you can just run a game, adjudicate it right there, and the LLM or yourself can just send materials back out. And so that is what I think is revolutionary. There's, no, really no words to describe the like awe on people's faces when they see it for the first time. I know like we showed it to Randy and I was really excited about, just how happy he seemed and saw, all the use cases for it and how it can democratize it. And that's really what, we want to talk about now is the ethics of gaming and how that comes into Providence and how we think it likely comes into how y'all create games. Because games, as they become scalable, are going to change how people can interact with them. Right now, I would say the majority, if not all, of game designers are creating games with the intention to foster cognitive empathy, to unlock new opportunities for exploration. But as games become scalable, they can be demonized, they can be weaponized relatively easily. And so, David, what is your idea for the ethics of gaming in an age of LLMs when it's just so easy to go down a different rabbit hole that doesn't do what our philosophy has? Oop, can't hear you.
One sec.
Got you. All good.
You got me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. My computer's been trying to switch out to other microphones, and like it's picking up my cell phone and other things. It's a unique feature of Discord here. What I want to do is actually pause for a second and emphasize a different point, and then delve into ethics of LLMs a little bit more. So I think something is happening with LLMs that, I mean, people get to some extent, but I don't think that it's fully understood. The logic of LLMs as a branch of artificial intelligence is very different than where AI was 3 or 4 years ago, right? So if you look at what, say 4 years ago was, at the very top of people considered to be the best AI, it was recurrent neural networks. I don't want to kind of go into RNNs in great detail, but what I'd say is that RNNs to me lend themselves well to like hypothesis testing. Like RNNs are to some extent a device that can do a good job of brute forcing its way through a problem by looking at it through multiple lenses. LLMs are very different, right? So an RNN could eventually design a game. There'd be a logic to doing so, and there'd be a process that you'd work through. I think LLMs are much more direct than recurrent neural networks, and they allow something different that we've tried to take advantage of, which is that an LLM can understand in a way that recurrent neural networks could not, in my opinion, how to build a game the way Eleanor builds a game. And that's part of what's going on in Providence is we're teaching the LLM to design or to plot or to create narrative arcs the way we do. And this is something that doesn't just have applicability to games. I think that we still have a field, and sorry, not the gaming field, but people looking at AI, I think often aren't quite understanding the logic of LLMs and how they and what they make possible. My engineering team, what I love talking to them about is, almost every day they get excited because they realize they're coming upon, a set of problems that just nobody has tackled before. And that's a lot of fun. So the reason why we have this slide of ethics of games in an age of LLMs is because we're talking about how awesome LLMs are, but they're not unproblematic, right? Nothing is. If you're hearing a presentation about social media in 2005 and it talked about connecting the world and didn't mention disinformation and election interference and hate speech and the way terrorist groups could make use of social media, then it's literally missing not just something that would eventually come up, but something that was literally just around the corner. And so in the democratization of gaming, what we've been putting our finger on is games are a really intense experience, right? They're memorable, they seem very real. And we have a certain way we do games. And I know, Randy, from talking to you, that you have a very similar approach. It's that our games they should never make fun of people based on like their group. They shouldn't make fun of conservatives or liberals or people from any sort of class or caste or community. They should try to as best as possible capture what various actors believe, from the U.S. to Russia to China to terrorist groups and the like. When we talked about some of the Russian espionage campaigns, but like these all come from things that we've actually seen. In a lot of cases, we saw something come up after we designed the game, which is basically literally what we'd put into the game. And like that's a good sign that you're tracking and that you're representing things accurately. Games don't have to do that. In the non-serious game sphere, we've seen games designed to dehumanize groups, to dehumanize ethnic or religious groups. We've seen hate groups make use of them and the like. And we've also seen intense politicization of multiple spheres. To me, serious games isn't doing its job if it's a polemic, and especially if it's a polemic that dishonestly represents the world. And so, look, one's not going to be able to stop malign uses, just like one couldn't stop malign uses of the printing press or social media or the like. But I think that for us as game designers, now is the time to really talk about what the ethics of our community should be, because this community is going to grow, and it's going to grow quickly because of what we're describing, because LLMs really do make gaming much more accessible than ever before. So many people see the use cases, and many more are going to be drawn in. And so I think that we have an obligation to really have these ethical discussions. And ultimately, it may be that right now we're kind of in a Wild West industry. I've been there before, right? My background is in the counterterrorism sphere. I came into that sphere full time in 2004, so 20 years ago. 2004 was the Wild West of counterterrorism. Right, you had a lot of different figures because there was all this money poured into the field at that point in time. You had, you had some charlatans, some people with good ideas, some people with maybe bad ideas that would end up capturing bureaucracies and the like. We're in the Wild West of games right now, right? You have so many different ways that people do games, right? As you're talking about, a lot of people think that they're the only one doing Foresight Games. You have these kind of distinctive cliques who do games in different ways, but I think that and to some extent, I think that Wild West factors can encourage innovation, but they also allow a lot of roughness along the edges. I think there's a lot of conversations that we as a community need to have, and that would be beneficial and will help games to stick to their highest purpose, as opposed to games being used, which they inevitably. But I think we can mitigate the degree to which people use games in ways that are manipulative or at cross purposes. So with that, why don't we, like, I think to concretize what we've been talking about, I'm going to give you a look at Providence, and I have some ideas for this, but Jill, want to design a game with me? All right. First, like, let's take any questions, and then I'm going to start streaming again from my screen looking different.
Sounds good. First off, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, there's so many different threads I want to possibly go down. Let me open it up to other folks first to see if they want to chime in with questions, and then I'll maybe fire a few away before you demo the platform. Anyone want to chime in? Okay, well, while folks are thinking about questions, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like what I want to bring up first. Well, just on the ethics topic, I feel like there's so many different trails to go down on that end. I think there's of course the ethical uses of the tools and of games in general. I think there's also lots of interesting specific questions we could talk about with regard to even if you have good intentions, especially given some of the nascent state of LLMs, what do we need to be most watching out for in terms of bias in training data leading to all sorts of weird things, especially if it's being used to generate tens of thousands of words and then update tens of thousands of words. Sort of like how in using the platform do you sort of stay on top of it to make sure that it's not sort of by accident introducing lots of bias that you don't want into the game, into the materials.
So my answer is going to be, I think, maybe a surprising answer. I'm much more concerned about human bias than LLM bias here. right? So to me, for any game, like right now, it shouldn't be the LLM adjudicating it. At some future point, I think LLMs will be good for adjudication. Today, LLMs are completely inferior to humans for adjudication, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I'll give you like the biggest reason is that LLMs, like every LLM you might plug into, is trained to be agreeable, which means that it's going to try to make moves work, and it won't just smack moves down the way that one needs to for games like this. Sometimes it will, but it's going to tend to be much more agreeable. And like I've played around with a lot of different LLMs and some gaming plugins, and I've found that every time I play, like, and I can talk about kind of the sort of weird, interesting games that I've played. So I often will kind of like do I'll often do a game set up as kind of a kids movie with like kids kind of against like villains, which is like a kind of a fun genre. And like when I'm the kids, like obviously I win, but then when I'm playing the bad guys, like the game ends every time with all the kids dead, and I'm like, LLM, this is not supposed to happen, but like that's how it ends. It's like, no, your moves are way too good. Plus, it's just a bunch of kids. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the way it's supposed to work.
It's not genre
Um,
savvy, or really it's that like yes and is really good for improv, but in games often you want like yes but, and you want those complications and pushback.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's kind of that's a long rabbit hole I dove into. But what I would say is just the way we've set up Providence, and I think that this is the way something like this should be set up. A human is at the center of it. And to me, I'm much more concerned about human bias than LLM bias. And here's the like, so number one, like it's humans that are going to be setting kind of what the world is like. Like the LLM will do some of that, but humans have the overarching idea. The LLM fills in the details. Number two, like generally speaking, unless we're running like a large sample size, which is a very RNN type thing, I think that you're not going to get bias in results because it's a human who's setting the results, right? Ultimately, like it's a human that's going to adjudicate the moves. And so to me, I think like what my concern is that it makes human ideas much more scalable. And so it allows a lot more room for bad ideas to compete with good ideas in terms of the design of a game. And that to me is my focus right now in terms of the ethics and where bias comes into play.
That makes sense.
You're muted, Eleanor. Oh,
No, you're good. I can
no,
hear you
no,
now.
extra words. I just saw your lips moving, but there was no sound.
Yes, I was mouthing words as I do. Yeah, I'm joking. But I would just wanted to add that I think there's a lot of unknown bias in human adjudication too, and that's something that people need to be aware of. And when we talk about the ethics of gaming, that's something I always think about when I'm designing games: is what do I think is going to happen, and how is what I inherently think is going to happen creating that future. And so what I think Providence and LLMs and platforms for game design, something what the referees need to be thinking of is this is to learn about different decisions you can make. That's what I really love about Providence is the games are replayable, so people can explore different directions in that in figuring out what's going to happen. And that is something I think as game designers we should always think that it's okay to explore. Maybe things go really terribly wrong if you try to nuke Russia, probably, in a game. Like, I don't know if that's the best idea. And if you're advisors to, the president of the United States, they'll probably shoot that down. But that's what referees have to do. They have to, weigh the positives and negatives of things. And so we just need to be aware of on our end, that human bias is not inherently known too.
Yep.
And what I'm doing as we're talking is I'm actually going to start designing a game you all can watch. I've been putting it into Providence. It's about, as I said, this is really this front and center of my mind. It's about the fall of the Assad regime. And here's kind of the point. I'll make a point about this. And again, like one can watch this on the screen because it's streaming while we're talking. I want to continue this conversation. But what you'll see is in about 6 minutes, I'll be done filling in the prompts. And we'll have a fully playable game about post-Assad Syria that will be capable of yielding insights into this problem set. And the reason why I want to do this is because I think this is one of the top use cases for what Providence does. And I just want to explain a little bit before we dive back into the conversation. So Providence is designed to ask the kind of questions that we ask as designers. Then in 6 minutes or less, depending on how long you type in the prompts, you will have a fully playable game. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a playable game about post-Assad Syria. And the reason why I say this is a great use case is because this just happened. And it's something where insight would be really helpful. And there's so many branches and possibilities that I guarantee you most of the analysis that you're going to see is going to be wrong. Like having been in the CT field, like I'm guaranteeing you that most of the analysis and most of what people tell you will happen, with some exceptions, but most of it will not end up being accurate when people are projecting out the future, as opposed to just kind of talking about interests of different factions. A game will almost certainly be much more accurate, not in the results, but in outlining the different conflict lines that arise and the realm of possibilities that arise. It will help you think things through better. So I'm going to start working on this game. You can look along with me as I do this, and I want us to keep on talking. And Eleanor, since I'm designing the game, that means you're going to have to bear the brunt of answering questions and conversing with all the nice people here.
Oh yes, I will try my best.
All right. Well, as you're going there, and if you want, keep chiming in with some of the decisions you're making as you're describing. But yeah, one of the discussion points that we talk about now, we talked about a little bit after the demo too, is like whenever there's a new wave of enabling technology, one of the oftentimes what it'll do is make existing activities easier, cheaper, more democratized access, faster, whatever it might be. But there's also a different set of like what wasn't possible before, but is now possible. And so when thinking about specifically LLMs in games, the types of things that jump to mind are, well, okay, now you can design really complex games for just one person, where that wouldn't have been feasible economically before. Or you can design games potentially that have 1,000 roles, where you would, even mega games don't really scale up to 1,000 people, although we'd probably need advancements on the adjudication side to really pull that off. And so I was just wondering if there are other ways you were thinking about how does this push out the frontier of what is even possible beyond just doing what we currently do, but better and faster?
I think what LLMs really are doing is they're making people realize that there are other ways to learn. People are really interested in AI nowadays. I know I took a class my last semester in college about the future of AI and the impacts it was going to have. And I think AI and putting AI into LLMs can give it the spark that brings people who might not previously be interested in games to just look at it for the first time and say, like, this is something feasible and affordable. I think games are really, like, at least historically, in my case and my knowledge, have been really long and hard to make, and really expensive to make, mostly. And so it's been unable to hit those different verticals like K through 12, which I'm really excited to see it impact. And so the spark is kind of something I would see initially. I'm gonna think on that question though. I know maybe David's writing. I bet he has some ideas as well. But I think it's the democratizing factor that really is going to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates to me. And I think a lot of it, like, we can speculate now, but the only way we're going to find it out is by experimenting and having a bunch of people experimenting at the margins and seeing what works and what's now possible.
Yeah. I see it also like working as kind of, I don't play D&D, but people have been, looking at this and being like, oh, we could use it in, like adjudication for games or create our own, have a fun family game night. And lots of people, I think when we played Randy, I put you in as a character.
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Yes, we put ourselves in as characters. And I'm having, like, I just moved to DC, as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, and I'm having a housewarming party, and I am likely to play a game. To be honest, I'll like invite like my friends over and I'll open a bottle of wine and be like, who wants to play a game? And we'll create something together. And I think that's a new vertical that I wouldn't have been able to do before, and game designers can quickly do that too.
Yeah, definitely. so many angles to drive the conversation. I mean, another one that jumps to mind too is the like, and this is one of those things I think we're just gonna have to keep figuring it out and then refiguring it out as the technology changes. But the mental models for where and how we collaborate it and what we trust LLMs and other emerging tech with. Versus where we remain more skeptical or retain things inside. Like I like the mental model of, oh, it's the research assistant right now, and just like you wouldn't fully trust the research assistant to like do everything that you still want to be in the loop. It's a lot of those metaphors transfer, and so I think there's gonna be lots of questions there, but also in terms of like what is the iteration loop when sort of going back in a lot of games. I think there's this element of like the real world is really messy. A lot of experts have their own fairly complex models, sometimes explicitly, sometimes it's sort of implicit and driven off of intuition. And then oftentimes there's communicated toy models. Like here's the simplified version of like the different factions, what they care about, what their incentives are, how they might react. So I know in a lot of my game design practice, it's like how do we make the toy model explicit to us, the designers, and then how do we sort of expose that or help the players gain an intuition for it? And so I imagine there's interesting questions in terms of the like how do you whether through this version of Providence or a future version, like how do you make it consistent sort of across all materials being created that like, okay, here's the toy model that the LLM can be exposed to, and the LLM's not going to directly articulate the toy model, but they're going to give lots of sort of hints and glimpses at and make sure the materials they're producing are consistent with that toy model.
We're currently, I think like very preliminarily, we can do that. Like I've created games. Right now, I just finished creating a game for the Army, and it was about rare earth elements, and I used Providence in some of the creation, and it was kind of exploring how the PRC influence in Africa and things like that, but you can't say it explicitly, like you just said. And so I put in background information and my goals. Like what you can see is one of the questions in this is what are the goals? What do you want to get out of this game? What is the tone? What is the theme that people want to pull out? And you can say, do not make this explicit. And the LLM, because of, our back-end stuff, is going to make it so it's not explicit. So we're still iterating on that, but I think right now it is already doing that. And just to mention really briefly, something I really enjoy about LLMs is the ability to make you think out of the box and go down, different rabbit holes that come into the game. So I'm creating a game right now called Arctic Awakenings that I briefly mentioned, and I might have mentioned it in the last call we did actually. But one of the things that LLM, I was like, I need a soft power for North Korea. North Korea is one of the teams. Give me some ideas. And this is 2030, like sanctions. I gave them the background of like what the nuclear system looks like then, what the world is going on in that exact moment. And I said, give me some ideas. And they gave me like 30. And I hated like, I would say 25 of them. And then I delved into 5 of them. And what I ended up coming up with and developing through the LLM was Eternal Flame, which is a K-pop, but it's Kim pop. It's a Kim Jong-un state-sponsored K-pop group, and it's like West meets Korean pop. And actually, and this is based in reality, like North Korea has a military version of like a singing group that they have, and it's not very successful. So this is that successful version, and that's what the LLMs helped me build that out. So I think that's something really fun that LLMs can do, and like Providence can help you do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a degree to which like any creative endeavor benefits from generate a ton of ideas, and a lot of them are going to be bad, and that's okay because you're going to be able to filter through. And LLMs definitely align with that method of creative approach.
Okay, so I just have to flag Michael's comment, and they call it Juche wave. That's something you might like with his permission. Maybe we can even steal that for our game.
What is it? I didn't see the comment. What does it say?
So Michael typed
I see.
that he calls it Juche wave.
Oh my
It's
God.
brilliant, right?
I love that. Right now they're called Eternal Flame, but that's so much better.
Well, Eternal Flame is a good name for the group, but like Juche wave is a great name for K-pop. Brilliant.
K-pop. Juche wave is beautiful.
Wave.
That's what I say.
So, David, Oh, go ahead.
The game is now creating.
Yeah.
It will exist in a minute. And part of the reason I wanted to do this actually is I've had multiple people reach out to me about this. So this is probably a game that this is almost certainly a game that we will run within the next 2 months.
Yeah.
In the old days, prior to creating Providence, even with LLMs, there's no way we could have done this. And now I have full confidence that we'll be able to create a playable game very quickly on this. This is my first cut at that playable game, so we'll see how it turns out. Hopefully, it'll be cool.
Can you walk us
I'm
through
sure
the prompts that you entered as you went through the sort of dialogue wizard?
What'd you say?
Can you just walk us through, like, high level, what were the different types of questions you answered in the prompt boxes?
Yeah, it takes you through questions on what year it is, what the central themes of the game are, what the tone should be, who the actors are, and the like. And so in going through, and again, then people can watch what I put in terms of the prompt engineering to Providence. But I put a lot of information in terms of who the factions are, how the factions will relate to each other, what the points of tension are. And I ended up putting things in like the role of Hayat Tahrir Sham, which is they're the ones who conquered Damascus, and they're a group I spent a lot of time studying. I created 6 different teams: HTS, Iran, ISIS, Russia, Syrian Christians, and the U.S. And there's a lot of others that I could have created, but those were the first ones that came to mind. And I also entered that there should be other significant non-player actors, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. I might not have typed in Turkey, but if so, that was just an oversight on my part because they clearly should be one. And also, I put in the Kurdish factions. So a lot of this is really riding on Providence's ability to infer information about the actors, infer second-order consequences, and infer relationships. And thus far, it's always been good at doing so. Like, to us, Providence should really be an 80% solution. Like, to us as game designers, there's gonna be editing that's needed. But like even with that being the case, right, it makes a game like this possible in a way that it wasn't before. Like what we have just created would have taken weeks of our time to produce previously, and I think we have just created a game that can be played. Let's take a look at it. So here's the information environment. An opinion piece on the global implication of Syria's new power dynamics by Dr. Anissa Karim. The collapse of the Assad regime has left Syria teetering on the brink of chaos, with the vacuum of power giving rise to a complex mosaic of factions, each vying for control. This seismic shift in the Middle East geopolitical landscape has far-reaching implications, not only for regional stability, but also for global security. At the heart of this turmoil is the emergence of Hayat Tahrir Sham as a formidable force, having captured Damascus and set the stage for a potential Sunni Islamic State. It has immediate repercussions. ISIS's resurgence in eastern Syria, the complication of U.S. and Russian forces. So it does a good job of outlining the various factions that are there. Similarly, here is an article from the Washington Post. The fall of Damascus to HTS marks a significant shift in the balance of power in Syria, says Dr. Lauren Jenkins, a Middle East analyst at the Global Institute for Strategic Studies. It highlights the challenges faced by moderate factions in the international community in stabilizing the region. It says it goes over the threat of extremism, the plight of Syrian Christians. Basically, as we scroll through this, and you see kind of the things that it's brought out, this is what I would want to have in an opening news feed as a game designer. There's an interview with an expert on Syrian geopolitics, Layla Haddad in the Middle East Observer. With the control of Damascus now in the hands of HTS, what are the immediate impacts we're witnessing in the region? Layla Haddad. The power shift in Damascus has led to a significant realignment of local and international power structures. Immediately, we're seeing increased sectarian tensions, particularly against minority groups, which has exacerbated the humanitarian crisis. The political vacuum left by Assad's departure has emboldened various factions, leading to intensified skirmishes as they vie for control. A little bit of a non-answer, but that's sort of what experts do. But also, it's highlighting, like, its reading in is roughly accurate. That is basically what we're seeing right now. And also just another interview with Layla Mansour in the Global Observer. Other documents that were created. So there's been different social media posts created. There is a scene center document that all of them get, which explains the rules. It gives objectives for each of the actors for HTS, establish a Sunni Islamic State and control major urban centers. ISIS reclaim lost territories in eastern Syria and expand influence. I probably would edit that and have their goal be reclaim the caliphate. But again, these are all things which now, as I kind of work with Providence to eventually create this game, it'll allow me to do. U.S. support Kurdish forces and counter extremist threats. Russia maintain influence and protect strategic interests. Iran expand Shiite influence and support allied factions. And then the Syrian Christians secure protection and preserve cultural identity. It's also created these background documents for each of the 6 teams that I put together. And so, like, the point I'd make, and we could get into other things, but this really isn't an advertisement for Providence. Instead, it's just pointing out that, like, with LLMs, there's a lot of transformative things that we can do. And so the 2 things that this did that are very different than what you've seen in LLMs before is, one, the questions it walks you through are the kind of questions we would ask. And so it creates a game, roughly speaking, in the same way that Eleanor would design a game. The second thing is that rather than creating things document by document, it created the entire game environment at once. And it will do that for subsequent turns as well. This is why we say that LLMs are transforming and democratizing the process of games, because suddenly, like, as you all saw, we're sitting here, I was typing in the background while Eleanor was taking the lead and answering interview questions, and voila, 6 minutes later, we have a game, and it's a game that we could all sit down and play right now.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it's the power and potential is very, very clear. Very, very cool. What has been most surprising to you? Actually, 2 questions that are somewhat interrelated. One, what has been the normal process of going from initial generation through to even first playtest just within your team? In terms of cleaning up, evaluating, iterating on the documents, etc. Like, what does that look like?
So the main challenge has been trying to get an LLM to do a reasonable approximation of what Eleanor would do as a game designer. Right. So, like, we just had our very first Providence design game run at Wheaton College. It was a huge success, but also, like, I stepped in to do a lot with that game to make it successful, including creating some of the documents and more advanced versions of Providence than the professor was using. So I think that there's a process of having the tool catch up to what designers can do. For me, the biggest challenge we face as a company is we don't have venture capital investment. And so, like, we have to make hard decisions each week. We get a certain amount of scrum points. We have to decide which features we can put in. Something like this is expensive. I mean, what you're looking at cost us, well over $100,000 to build. I throw that in just because, like, we're all trying to do really interesting things in this area. And, there can be a lot of barriers to doing things that are genuinely transformative. And I think that, generally speaking, we're going to, like, for us as Valens Games, we'd like to keep it closer to the gaming community rather than having, some big box company come in who doesn't necessarily, want to support, have the same sort of interest in supporting the community. So, like, that to me has been the challenge, that there's a lot of things that are imperfect, and we know that they're imperfect. We have the solution, but it might take, like, 4 to 8 to 12 weeks to roll out that solution. That being said, like, to me, this is maybe at this point 0.3% of what it will eventually be, but I think that 0.3% is already transformative and will become much more so. Like, literally every week we're putting updates in that are able to allow us to make much more out of it. And one of the things Eleanor and I are going to have a talk this week, but I'm going to be like, there's a lot that she's going to do on the prompt engineering front to take some of these documents that I think are good now and could be a little bit better, and to really make them be as good as an LLM can do. Which, with the right back-end prompt engineering, I'm confident that like a document like this. I think it's good, right? This is like the goals and motives document for Syrian Christians. I'd like the document to be different. This doesn't quite match my vision for the document. And there's probably like 20 things that Eleanor and eyeballing it would like to be different that we could do differently from a prompt engineering front. And so like that to me is the big challenge, just the challenge of being resource limited and knowing exactly what we want to implement, but each week having to make hard choices about like where the imperfections are going to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, it definitely feels like through prompt engineering and some fine tuning, perhaps on like past games you've made, you'll be able to have it more approximate your house style, and get the types of material, the types of the more sensitive material, adjustments to the materials that you'd want on the first go. Eleanor, were you gonna say?
Yes, I was going to say soon we're going to do exactly that. So I just finished sending over like a laundry list of documents that we think are really high quality that David or I have created, and that's going to train Providence. And we have a lot of, we want to take out all those like LLMisms. That's what I call them. Like in a surprising twist or in a revolutionary way. Like I want them out. So that's what I'm doing right now is I'm creating my laundry list of things I don't want included. Because I really think the magic of this is when we humanize it. And you should see what we were at like literally 3 weeks ago. We
Yeah.
are where we were supposed to be at the end of February right now because our team is so amazing. And like it's moving on so quickly, and seeing like hearing about the use cases at Wheaton College, it's just really exciting to see the difference that it's making in people's lives already. When with what David said, it's 0.3% of what it will be.
Yeah, definitely. It's always exciting to be building at the frontier.
And a huge shout out to Tim Carlisle and our dev team, who are excellent. I'll leave you with one kind of note, which is a surprisingly effective prompt is try to sound less like an LLM.
And
I
it
use
works.
that all the time. All the time. I say stop sounding like an LLM, and it works.
Yeah.
In emails too, like everything.
Perfect. Well, we're now past the top of the hour. And is there anything else you want to say or share to folks who are watching this later before I stop the recording?
Just as always, Randy, I really enjoy the conversation with you. The Foresight Games community is a great one. It's an honor to be able to present here and to show some of what we're thinking about. I think what we're talking about is, when we look back at a year or 18 months on this conversation, almost everything that Eleanor and I are talking about, I think will seem extraordinarily intuitive. Like I don't think it's a question of if. I think that LLMs are in the process of transforming the gaming community, and if we all do it right, it will be empowering to us. And all of us have a role in ensuring that our community can get the best out of games in this age of democratization of games, and try to make sure that all of us are in this field for a reason. I think all of us have a very optimistic vision of what games can offer the world. I think that AI and LLMs will help to draw some of that out. We'll also draw out much darker uses of games. And I think all of us have a role in bringing about the best and staving off the worst.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording there, but always appreciate you coming and talking to the community.